Yeah.
If you think that you can continue to be doing what you're doing before and be successful now, you're sadly mistaken. And that's true. And I speak to leaders too. You have, even if things that made you successful before no longer work. So we have to be flexible and adaptable.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Ayushi Parekh at Leaders Hum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform, which is also the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM. That's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We at peopleHum run the peopleHum blog and channel that receives more than 2 lakh visitors a year. And we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. We have with us today Dr. Elia Gourgouris. Dr. Elia is the president of the Happiness Center, an organization of leading world experts in the field of positive psychology. He has helped thousands of individuals, both personally and professionally, to achieve happiness, success, and wellness. His experience as a clinical psychologist and profession led him to seek new paths that would help people's everyday lives as well as their careers. So he evolved into an executive coach and leadership consultant for senior executives. Being an avid writer, Dr. Elia has published over 100 articles and is a Huffington Post Thrive Global contributor. His mission is to make his world a better place and happier place. And we are so glad to be at the receiving end of this conversation tonight. We heartfully welcome you, Dr. Elia, to peopleHum.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, my pleasure. So, Dr. Elia, without any further ado, we should start with the questions. So, my first question for you today is, Dr. Elia is the founding partner at the Global Institute of Thought Leadership. Would you say there are certain qualities that you propagate through the work that you have do?
Yes, it's a very exciting endeavor. In the middle of the pandemic, we began a mastermind group of thought leaders, small group initially, that grew. We kept meeting on a weekly basis. And at some point it grew. We're about 30 of us now, people from all over the world who have worked with the top 100 companies in the world, profit and nonprofit, government and private sector, across all industries. And, these are best-selling authors like myself, international keynote speakers, and executive coaches and talent management. Anyway, we collectively realized after a few months that there's so much brain power in this, in this Zoom call in essence, that we decided to create the Global Institute for Thought Leadership. And our website is giftleadership.com. Very easy to find if you want to know more about it. And basically, we do keynote speaking, executive coaching, leadership training and development, even produce papers. I mean, there's professors at Harvard. I mean, we have like just people like Columbia University and so on.
Yes.
So it's a great organization of people that really want to make this world a better place. And that's what attracted me to this group. I feel honored to be part of it. And 2021 looks very exciting as we begin to expand our reach. And really, when you say propagate the idea of how can we make organizations better, more humanistic, where employees, not just employee engagement, but people feel loved and cared for and are given the opportunities to grow within the organizations and to thrive, and obviously coach their leaders, because in the end, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, it doesn't matter what you do, what matters really, sorry, let me repeat that again.
Yes.
Yeah. That in the end, it doesn't matter what you say. What really matters is what you do, right? And we want leaders to raise their own level of leadership as we deal with the next normal. We're not going, the pandemic has changed everything, as you know. There is no old normal. We're not going back to anything that we did before. But there's great opportunities as a result of that. And so we're excited to assist in that movement, to grow and to support leaders in facing the multiple crises that humanity is facing right now.
That's wonderful. So moving on to the second question, one of your mottos has always been happiness is a choice. In your experience as a happiness and corporate wellness expert and a global professional speaker, what would you like to contribute to this motto?
Yeah, I do believe that happiness is a choice, but there's a lot more to it than that. Happiness is also a skill set. In other words, it's something that you can learn. I wrote a book about 5 years ago, Seven Paths to Lasting Happiness. And the key, of course, is lasting happiness, not some kind of superficial, let's have a good day today. That's really important. And it became a number one bestseller here in America. And people have said, Dr. Elia, we like your book. It's very conversational. Like I didn't write as a PhD. I wrote it from my heart, just like I'm talking to you right now. They said, but it's not something that, Aristotle didn't say like 2,500 years ago, right? It's not like you're presenting something new. But here's what we like about it. At the end of every chapter, you have a couple of points for the reader to consider and to meditate on and to think about deeply, a couple questions to answer. But then the most important thing of your book is what you call take action. In other words, everybody knows that loving ourselves is a good thing for our self-worth. It's a good thing for our physical health and our mental and emotional health. People just don't know how to do it. Everybody knows that forgiveness is a wonderful thing, especially self-forgiveness, because human beings are very hard on themselves and they seldom forgive themselves. But even if they understand that, they don't know how to do it. So my book takes people, it's almost like a workbook based on my experience as a clinical psychologist in private practice for 18 years and then my time in the corporate world. I take the reader, this is exactly how you do it. Practicing gratitude. Of course, gratitude is a key component to happiness, right? But can you practice gratitude when everything seems to be going wrong? And I claim that we're all graduates from the University of Adversity, right? Everybody has adversity. The older you get, the higher your degree in adversity, right? So how can we be grateful in the midst of adversity? Is that even possible? And the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. And this is what has resonated with readers is the applicability of happiness is a choice. It's a great slogan. It's a great motto. But more importantly, happiness is a skill that anybody can learn. It does take work, but if you do the work, I guarantee you will find happiness and wellness in your own personal life and that of your organization too.
Thank you so much for this beautiful explanation.
You're welcome.
Moving further to the third question, in order to generate a culture of happiness, it is essential to generate accountability and a strive to productivity among employees. So, what would you say are some key points in that for respect that leaders must follow?
First of all, I love the word accountability in it. And in essence, I'm not really an executive coach. I'm more of an accountability coach. I mean, that's not my actual title, but that's really what I do. I get to know my clients, and then I give them the tools necessary to be successful in their organizations, and then I hold them accountable. And really, they have to do the work. I don't do the work for them. They have to do the work. So why is happy employees important in an organization, and what does leadership and how can leadership contribute to that? First of all, the one thing that almost nobody talks about is that happy employees tend to be physically healthier, meaning they have less time off because they don't go to the doctor because they take care of themselves. They practice self-care. Furthermore, they're more creative. They're more innovative. They're better teammates. And I gave this talk actually last week, and somebody said, well, why do you say that? Why do you say that happy employees are better teammates? The reason is simple, because if my batteries are full, because I've taken care of myself and done my own, self-care, I have something to give to somebody else. If I'm always stressed out and I'm depressed and I'm anxious and I'm running from one thing to the next, I have nothing to give to my teammates. So happy employees are better teammates because they elevate the team. Um, all of those things, of course, lead to increased productivity. And of course, increased productivity and employee engagement and employee effectiveness leads to what? Leads to a more profitable company, more profitable culture. So what can leaders do to support their employees? The biggest issue right now facing organizations across the globe, regardless of the industry, the number one issue is how can we ensure the mental and physical well-being of our employees? That's the number one issue. In the old days, that wouldn't even make the top 10. And the second biggest issue is employee engagement, effectiveness, and productivity, and how do we maintain that? Which of course, that's to be expected. Well, you can't get number two until you get number one right. So as leaders, we need to focus more on the well-being of our employees. And given that so many people are still working from home and they're not even, they're not even showing up in the office because of COVID, although that is going to change soon, I hope. When I speak with senior HR leaders, I say, listen, when you talk to your employees, and oftentimes it's done through Zoom like we're doing right now, don't ask them how they're doing. Close the door, lean into the camera and say, how are you really doing? How's your family? How are your kids? Is there anything that I can do or this company can do to make your life better and easier? In other words, ensure their mental and emotional well-being first. Because if you ask somebody how they're doing, they're going to say, I'm doing fine, when in reality, they're not doing fine. According to the United Nations, we have over a billion people, that's with a B, that are suffering from depression, anxiety, and stress. Mind you, these are people that did not have pre-existing conditions prior to COVID. And those numbers are way underreported. There's no way only 1 out of 7 people on this planet is depressed, anxious, and stressed. I don't know anybody who isn't. So you as a leader have to show up differently with increased empathy, increased care, increased vulnerability, and transparency. And the other thing that I share with leaders is when you ask them how they're really doing, if how's their family and so on, and do it authentically, be more vulnerable and more open with them and share with them, you know what? I'm kind of struggling too, to be honest with you. My family, I have to take care of an elderly parent, my kids, I'm concerned about them. In other words, show up vulnerable as a leader because that will, first of all, they will trust you. They will feel a connection with you and then they will open up with you. And that's how as senior leaders, we need to raise the bar in terms of leadership in how we take care of our employees right now. We can't wait any longer for that to happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely true because the more positive energy you pass on, the employee will have more positive energy towards the work and productivity will be definitely higher.
Of course, it
So,
makes sense, but we need to consciously think about how we come across as leaders, not like everything is fine with me, but what's wrong with you? No, we're all in this together. And I heard this wonderful saying, we may not all be on the same boat, but we're all in the same storm.
yeah,
So the storm affects us differently, right? But we're all in the same storm, regardless of race, nationality, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. We're all in the same storm.
absolutely. So, moving on to the second last question, I would like to ask you what are the 4 personality types? As in your book, Seven Keys to Navigating a Crisis, you talk about the difference between danger and fear. Can you explain?
Yes, well, let's talk about the danger and fear first. So in the middle of the pandemic, I had this, very strong impression that I needed to write a book about the pandemic early on, and I called my best friend and partner, and I said, I'm going to start writing tomorrow. We got to get this book out now, which was, this was back in March, and we got it out in 45 days. To put into perspective, my first book, the best-selling book, took me 3 years to write. So, but I felt like there was a tsunami of mental health issues that would be as a result of the pandemic. And so we wanted to help people and organizations. So the difference between danger and fear is this. If somebody coughs in our faces, we're in danger. That's not a political statement. That's a factual, scientific, and medical statement, right? So we need to do what we can to protect ourselves. But fear, on the other hand, is not your friend. You don't want to make decisions for your personal life or your professional life or as an organization based on fear because fear is paralyzing. So let's be respectful of the danger of this pandemic, but let's make sure that we don't give in to fear and live a fear-based life because nobody's happy when they're in the midst of fear. Now, when you're dealing with not just a pandemic, but any crisis, a financial crisis, a mental health crisis, a political crisis, a personal crisis, there are 4 personality types. The first one we like to call the victim. And the victim is, why is this happening to me? Like, poor me. And they get down, they get depressed, as if it's only happening to them and not the other 7 billion people on this earth. So that's the victim. The second one is the critic. Now, the critic, regardless of what the federal, state, or local government, or the United Nations, or the World Health Organization says, they criticize everything. A simple, almost silly example is this. You know what, Elia, you should wear a mask when you go outside. Well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. Okay, Elia, never wear a mask when you go outside. What are you trying to do? Kill me? Like, no matter what you do, they criticize everything, right? It doesn't matter. They're in critic mode. Then we have the third type, which we call the bystander. Now, the bystander, mind you, is a good person, but it's almost the deer with the headlights look, meaning they are so overwhelmed by all the changes taking place that they really don't know what to do. They might look to their neighbor, they might look to the left and to the right, but they're immobilized and paralyzed by fear, so they do nothing. And what all three of these personality types have in common is this: they don't move the needle to some positive solution, right? They don't. They don't offer anything positive, uplifting that gets you out of that funk. Now we come to the fourth personality type, which we call the navigator. And of course, that is the premise of the book, Seven Keys to Navigating a Crisis, which is really a practical guide to emotionally dealing with pandemics and other disasters. What does the navigator do? First of all, navigators begin with practicing self-care, meaning that they take care of themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And one more thing I want to say about these four personality types: don't feel like you have to be one or the other. And this is my psychology hat that I'm wearing right now. All four of these types exist within each human being. We all have all four of those types. For example, when the pandemic first hit, and the first lockdown happened back in March, all my speaking engagements got canceled in 1 week. I was supposed to speak all over the world. India, Barcelona, this, that. I mean, I did the Barcelona one, but it was on Zoom. It's not the same thing as going to Barcelona. Everything got canceled. So I felt like the bystander, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? And I felt like the victim, like, why is this happening to me? I wanted to go to Spain. I've never been to Spain and speak there. So I did feel like a victim. And have I been critical of the federal government? Yeah, absolutely, I have. However, and this is the important thing, if I stay a victim or if I criticize for 6 months, who am I hurting? Myself. I'm robbing myself of my own happiness. If I want to feel like a victim, let's do it for like 2 or 3 hours. Feel badly about yourself, like, oh, poor me, my life is terrible, and then snap out of it, and then pivot and become a navigator. So the seven keys to navigating a crisis is a byproduct of me myself becoming a navigator. Since I couldn't travel and talk all over the world about happiness and wellness, I decided to write a book. That wasn't a plan. At the beginning of 2020, I didn't say, you know what, one of my goals this year is to write another book. I had no plans because I was busy. But what ended up happening as a result of that, I became flexible and adaptable, which is, another, besides self-care, that's another big component. Why is flexibility, adaptability, and resilience keys to not only surviving a crisis, but even, I dare say, thriving during a crisis? This is the reason why. And we'll use the parable of the oak tree and the palm tree. As you know, the oak tree is this massive, huge tree, right? Huge, tall, has been around for 100 years, powerful. But during a storm, during a cyclone or a hurricane, if there's enough saturation on the ground, enough rain, and then enough wind at the peak of the storm, what happens to oak trees? They come crashing down on cars, people, homes. I mean, this is what happens. On the flip side, the palm tree is relatively thin. It can be tall, and at the peak of the storm, it starts bending and bending. Sometimes it bends all the way parallel to the ground. But when the storm passes, and this is symbolic of the storms of life now, what happens to the palm tree? It rises up again. And not only survives, but it's actually stronger than it was before the storm because its roots had to dig in deeper into the ground to withstand the hurricane type winds, right? So I'm asking people in life now, in any crisis, to be a palm tree, not an oak tree. So people have actually pushed back and said, well, Dr. Elia, that's a great analogy. It's a great visual. I'll always remember the palm tree, the oak tree. But what does an oak tree actually look like in human terms? And a person who's an oak tree has this approach and attitude. Done around here for 40 years. I'm not going to change now. Well, guess what? If you don't change, you're going to break. Yeah. If you think that you can continue to be doing what you were doing before and be successful now, you're sadly mistaken. And that's true. And I speak to leaders too. You have, even if things that made you successful before no longer work. So we have to be flexible and adaptable. Think about professional athletes. Like these are like as physically fit. These are the elite around the world, whether they're football players, soccer players, whatever. Before their big game starts, what are they doing half an hour out in the field before the game starts? they stretch. Now, why do these physical specimens that are the best that we have in this world, the most talented, strong, powerful people, why are they stretching? Because if they don't stretch and if they're not flexible during the game, they could hurt themselves, pull a hamstring or have some other injury, right? Well, we're in the game of life, and if we're not flexible and adaptable in this game, we are going to break. So practice flexibility and adaptability. Be a navigator, in other words. Clearly practice your self-care. And self-care, I created a personal health assessment in this book that basically it takes about 2 minutes to take, and I can share that with you and with your audience later on if you want to have it as a PDF that looks at your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And in 2 minutes, it's 20 questions. You'll get basically an assessment. It's almost like going and getting a physical at the doctor's office and say, how am I really doing? How's my blood pressure? Let me do a blood test and see how everything is functioning on the inside, right? It's the same thing, but at least you'll know maybe I have some areas that I'm doing really well. These are my strengths, but maybe I'm really struggling with some other areas. And it's a simple scale of 1 through 5. Five, I'm doing excellent. One, I'm doing terrible. Three is I'm doing it okay. Well, if you score 4s and 5s, pat yourself on the back and say, man, I'm doing great, even in the midst of the crisis. Yeah. If you score a 3, clearly there's some room for improvement. But if you score yourself a 1 or a 2, those are red flags, meaning that those contribute to taking something away from your personal happiness and wellness. And you need to pay attention to that. And again, you need to move to action. Like, what will you do about it?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it's so insightful. So, moving on to the last question. So,
Yes.
you finish your books with a call to action in terms of being of service to others and practicing kindness. Why is that so vitally important to one's happiness?
Yeah, and I'm very passionate about that. And you're right. My happiness book ends with the 7 path to lasting happiness is being of service, and the 7 key to navigating crisis is being kind. Here's the reason why. First of all, happy people by nature tend to do acts of service and kindness on their own because their batteries are full. They have something to give to somebody else. On the flip side, as human beings, when we perform acts of kindness, there's something that happens innately. There are, chemicals that are released in our brain. They make us feel happy and content. So I say that happiness and kindness are connected. You can't have one without the other. So I ask people to practice kindness on a daily basis and help others. Now, having said that, and I do interviews like this like 2 or 3 times every week around the globe. Would you believe that I've gotten pushback from people in the audience who have said, Dr. Elia, are you serious? You want me to help somebody else? I'm drowning myself. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm stressed. And you're asking me to help somebody else? And they actually have said to me, what am I, my brother's keeper? This is actually a quote. I'm like, no, you're not your brother's keeper. You're your mother's keeper and your sister's keeper and your neighbor's keeper and your colleagues and your teammates keeper and the homeless person down the street or somebody 10,000 miles away. Because in the end, we're all brothers and sisters. And another thing, if you're listening to the sound of my voice, I promise you, you're better off than somebody else. All you got to do is look around because there's somebody else worse off than you. And when you go and you help them out, not only will you feel better about yourself, but you will have contributed to making this world a better place. So I invoke and I ask people to look around and to practice kindness. Now, some people have said, well, okay, that sounds great. And I wish I could do that. But, we're in lockdown. I can't help anybody. Not true. That's an excuse. There's so many people that we can help, even like you and I are doing right now. And I say that if you get a prompting, which is the second key to navigating a crisis, is awareness and listen to that still small voice inside, whether that's your intuition or your inner wisdom, or if you're a spiritual person, the spirit of God or to divinity, however you want to define that, that voice has a message, and that message is always correct. Whenever I've listened to that voice honestly, and I've acted upon it, it's always worked out. And when I've ignored that voice, I've always paid the price for it. Even writing the book it came from as an inspiration that, Elia, you need to get this book out. People are going to need your help. And I went into action immediately as a navigator. So if you get a prompting, you know what? I need to call so-and-so. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Get on a Zoom call or text or call them up and say, You know what? I'm just calling to check in on you, see how you're doing. I've been thinking about you. What is the worst thing that's going to happen? The worst thing, this is the worst thing that would happen is like, actually, I'm doing fine, but thanks for thinking of me. That's the worst thing that's going to happen. But more times than not, if you get a prompting to reach out to somebody else, even across the globe, it's because there's a reason for it. And they're going to say, Elia, it's kind of funny that you called me because I've really been struggling lately. And loneliness is at epidemic levels. People are lonely and isolated. We need to help one another, to lift one another, and to say, you know what, I'm here for you, man. You know, or my sister, or my daughter, or my mother, or my brother, and so on. I'm here for you, and you can rely on me. And I'll check back with you next week. That's why that's important, and that's how you do it, even in the middle of the pandemic.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Well, that was a very delightful and equally insightful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the knowledge with us, and we really look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Be well, be happy, be safe.
You too.
Thank you.